Today's episode of Diversifi Speaker Series, we're joined by Katelyn Moxley. She's currently a junior at BYU. She's worked for Diversifi Ventures, Vermilion Rock Advisors. She's an academic advisor at BYU. And she also works at Brigham Capital, which is a really interesting student investment fund. Katelyn, thank you for joining us.
So happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So I kind of wanted to start with kind of what drew you to BYU. I think that, I don't think people watching will know, but you were valedictorian, am I right?
That's right. Living it, love high school.
That's right. So I bet you did have a lot of, I bet you had a lot of options of where you could have gone. So what is it that kind of stood out to BYU for you? And then in turn, like once you got there, like how did you tailor your career path using, what you had?
Yeah, absolutely. So my goal my entire life and kind of the plan was to play collegiate soccer. And so there's kind of a whole process for that, where you can go play, who you can play for. It's pretty similar to actually how like finance recruiting works, but so that was the goal. And then my junior year, which is like big year for sports recruiting. I don't know if you're super familiar with that at all.
Right.
It's at least pretty important year for soccer recruiting. I ran into a few injuries and I kind of had to call it quits on soccer for about 9 months. And so that kind of was like a world shaken, what am I going to do now? And so before then I had really like my only college thoughts were, where am I going to play soccer? So that kind of led me to think more academically, and it felt pretty late on in the game. I hadn't really toured any colleges except for soccer purposes. I didn't know like what schools had the best programs that I was interested in. And kind of my decision was that I wanted to leave Las Vegas, where I'm from, because there weren't many great options for me there, based on what I was interested in. And I wanted to go somewhere that was far enough away from home, but not too far that I couldn't come home and visit if I needed to, or if there's an emergency. So that kind of left me with California, Arizona, and Utah. And California just kind of cut out the picture, super expensive. And so then I found myself looking at BYU, which is my older brother goes here right now. I had a sister who graduated from here, so it's a little bit of a family school. And the more I looked into it, I think it was just kind of one of those decisions that it just felt right. And I kind of already knew I wanted to major in finance, and they have a great finance program and a great support system for the business school. So that's kind of where I landed, and it's actually the only school that I ended up applying to, just because I kind of fell so late into the college search process. So I'm happy to be here, and I'm grateful for my decision.
Yeah, I think like a lot of times like some people just like get flustered over like where they end up, and then they just, once they get there, they become like really satisfied. I think that happened to me, when I was applying here to Florida State. It wasn't my top choice, but now coming here, like I would have never chosen to go anywhere else.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything happens for a reason, so.
Exactly. So I would love to hear a little bit about Brigham Capital. I think it's really, really cool that you guys have a student investment fund that's completely run by you guys. And I think it's an initiative that should be started at a lot more schools, because I think a lot of recruiting has been like requiring experience that is almost impossible to get like without anything there. So you need help from the school to kind of jumpstart you. So I'd love to hear about like what drew you to that and your experience through there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I came across Brigham Capital just from talking to some classmates and some peers in the finance program, club members, and they're kind of looking for more students, like to develop this investing group, I guess. And so kind of what it is, it's completely student run. We do have a few external professionals who come and kind of give us advice. And previously, it has been completely student funded. So there are like underclassmen who function as associates and do a lot of the groundwork, a lot of the research. And then there's some upperclassmen who are who oversee the whole production. They're the ones on the investment committee that make the investing decisions, how much money to invest, and they actually put in their own money. So it's just completely internal. But this semester we got $200,000 of a capital infusion, and from the CEO of a pretty big bank that's a BYU alumni, and his son is actually a finance major graduating and will be part of that group. So we're looking to do great things this year, spend some of that money, make it count. And it's honestly, the whole purpose of it is to give underclassmen experience and to give with actual tangible experience with investing. And so it's really great, and everyone who starts in it usually stays with it until they graduate. So it's just really developing a great reputation and a great community at BYU.
That's amazing. And how has that kind of played towards your career path that you're kind of setting out for yourself right now? I know you're kind of in the middle of recruiting, and like, what have you been able to take away from this experience that you've been able to apply elsewhere?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I have mostly been doing is investment research. So just reading blogs, reading the news, reading everything, picking stocks kind of thing, and building out models. Like what we mostly focus on value stocks too. So it's been like a super great learning experience, and also has kind of helped me form, which strategies do I like, which strategies are I'm less comfortable with. And it's definitely put a light on like the investment management side of finance, and has really drawn me to that. So that has been super helpful for me in kind of figuring out my career path.
I think it's a really unique perspective for you, because I've spoken a lot to a lot of East Coast people, but for you, it's a different culture out on the West Coast. And I guess that also applies to maybe what you're looking for in finance. So has that kind of played into what you're looking for as well for your future?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I would say the culture on the West Coast is definitely different than the culture on the East Coast, but especially in Utah, that was something that was a big adjustment for me. But it's something that once you're used to it, once you kind of get acquainted, and it's I think you get a different insight, a different perspective from people who come from elsewhere. But as far as, there's not a ton, aside from San Francisco, there's not a ton of these kinds of jobs and high finance available on the West Coast. So for me, at least, I think I grew up in Las Vegas. I go to school in Utah. I've kind of just been here my whole life. Of course, I visited the East Coast and been inside some firms out there, but it is kind of almost makes me want to try something out on the East Coast, live there, work there for a few years, gain a different perspective, experience a different culture, and just for a few years, and just see how it goes from there.
You might as well, yeah. So me and you originally met. We met at the Harris Williams Diversity Summit, which is really cool because, it's just another one of those diversity programs that, these financial firms are kind of helping to even the playing field for underrepresented minorities and women. So, what are your thoughts on kind of these initiatives that people are taking in terms of diversity recruiting and even the playing fields for minorities and women?
Yeah, I think the diversity events are amazing, and many firms are starting to offer them. They're becoming like more and more prevalent, and it gives students like an opportunity to get an inside look on like what the firm is doing and a unique perspective to interact with individuals within like they're on their own turf, which is completely different than just chatting with someone on the phone or over Zoom or even like a coffee shop.
Right.
And so and I also love that they provide like a great platform for students like ourselves to connect and meet each other and, you know, relate to the same experiences and obstacles that we're going through with recruiting, because we're all kind of in the same place.
Right.
And as far as being like a leveling the playing field for minorities and women, I think these programs do an awesome job, and it totally shows that the firm is calling out and they're saying, like, we want you here, we see you, we want you here. And I think that makes it a lot less intimidating navigating the stereotypical, like, white male dominated world of finance.
Right.
So I think they do a great job with it, and it's awesome to see more and more and to hear about these programs going on.
Right. And I think for the people watching that might be interested in these kind of diversity programs and they'd like to know, like, how is it that you kind of stood out and tailored your resume or your applications to these things? What maybe like different perspective, or what did you do to help yourself stand out in these kind of applications?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think especially as underclassmen, as sophomores, there's not a ton of experience that you might have on your resume. And so I think one like thing that benefited me was a lot of these things you have to submit like a cover letter as well. And I just tried to like be myself, like, you know, be professional, of course, but kind of let my personality show through on those. And that's something that you can't apologize for. You can't be like, oh, I wish I, you know, said this or didn't say that, because you're just being yourself. And I think firms honestly really appreciate that, because they go through so many applications, they read so many cover letters that are just the same over and over again. But the ones that stand out are the ones that the people who are just kind of, you know, have some personality. So of course experience is great, and that will for sure get your foot in the door, but that's just kind of something that I try and do.
Right. And I think that a lot of the people that you know, you meet at these kind of diversity summits, like one of the key factors that you see, or the common factors you see, is like everybody's really personable. So like you said, like it comes out in the resume or in the cover letter, but I think it's one of those things that's really underplayed in how important it is, just to be like, people just want to be with somebody that they can actually manage to be with in the office for 8 to 10 hours a day. So bringing out that personability and just being like a bright person. Yeah. I think that's super important. I want to hear a lot about your experience recruiting as a woman in the financial industry, and just in general, your experience as a woman, just in total. Like, how does that kind of affected your professional life and the decisions you've made in that kind of sense, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good question. So honestly, like I've kind of always been a little bit of a tomboy, and I think that's kind of been a blessing as a woman in finance. So I kind of feel comfortable even when I'm the only woman in a room, and I kind of like see it almost as a challenge, you know, like, and I have developed, like, I'm not as afraid to voice my opinions, even in a group of all men. And I also think there are great support systems like in place for women in male dominated professions, especially finance. And one thing that I've kind of tried to do is just be confident with who I am and where I stand, and as a woman in this profession. And I've come to find that my peers, and male and female, like really respect that. And I've also noticed like the people in my classes, they like, and people around me that I meet, like they want to see women succeed in this field because they're just so underplayed and underrepresented. So it's honestly been a really great experience, and I think that people are aware and they're conscious that, you know, we need more woman perspective and minority perspectives in the workplace. And so I think it's really awesome because there's so many people who just like want to see me succeed, which is an incredible feeling. more than I can ask for, honestly.
Yeah, I think that's so important to build that community and that support network so that it doesn't feel like you're just alone out there recruiting. I think like having those people reassuring you that coming from a diverse background is important, and it can be, you can make like a positive out of it once you start recruiting and getting yourself out there. So I think we talked a lot about the positives of these kind of diversity programs, but of course, I think you can agree with me is that there's always room for improvement and we're not quite there. So I'd love to hear about, in your opinion, like what are some of those shortcomings that still exist in general for some of these initiatives, and how can we better them?
Yeah, so I do feel that companies do a really great job, especially with kind of the social injustices like brought to the light and really publicized in recent years, that people are more aware of these injustices, and so they kind of make a conscious effort or a moral effort to combat them. And so one shortcoming I do see though is that sometimes it's the discrimination is not coming from necessarily outside, but like within the community of women. So these experiences are pretty rare, but I have experienced them where I'm talking with women professionals and they seem kind of standoffish. And I'm not sure if the sentiment kind of stems from the fact that these women worked hard, incredibly hard against the grain to get where they are. And maybe they think that's the way it is or the way it should be, or that people coming behind them should go through the same things. I don't know if that's where the sentiment is coming from, but I feel like, in my opinion, it's the people kind of outside the community who are more willing to help, which can be very frustrating sometimes. So I think it's just something we can all do a little better at.
And following up on that thought, what do you think we could do to kind of address that on an institutional level, I guess? But I guess that kind of problem is a person-to-person basis, but I think that it can be addressed in other ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like firms do a great job of it. There are plenty of women diversity events, women leadership, and these are becoming more and more popular. And I think just actually having these groups come together and interact will kind of maybe any of those tensions that might exist. And honestly, like I don't have any major feedback because from my perspective, I've noticed like the industry's doing a great job trying to make everyone feel a little more included.
Okay, well, at least they're isolated situations. We're getting there. We're getting there. In general, though, what would be some changes you'd like to see in the financial industry in any sense of it? Recruiting once you're there, the culture and the lifestyle.
Yeah, that is a great question. So the recruiting process for finance really reminds me a lot of, it's really similar to the recruiting process for soccer. It's just something that I can kind of relate to. And it just seems like every year it's just happening earlier and earlier and earlier. And, you have sophomore who have confirmed their junior internship and they haven't even done their sophomore internship. So it's pretty frustrating. And I feel pretty blessed that I was exposed to the finance industry pretty early on because I had an idea that that's what I wanted to do. But I know there are a lot of my classmates that they're starting their junior year, their junior core, and they don't know the difference between private equity and venture capital. And it like stresses me out almost because I'm like, you have to be recruiting right now. And I think that's just the nature of the beast. Like, I don't know what can be done because it's not only happening in finance, it's happening, in all professional areas and like athletics. So I think no one has really come up with a good solution yet because I haven't seen it implemented. I don't know if I'm the person to come up with that solution, but I think it is what it is. And it's frustrating, but something I think you just kind of have to get through.
Yeah, I completely agree. Just off the top of my mind, it just popped up in my feed the other day that Blackstone's diversity program just opened up already for the summer 2021. So that's them recruiting their diversity class for the summer of 2022, which is insane. That's, a year and a quarter ahead, or a year and almost a half ahead. So it gets stressful to the point where a lot of these diversity programs and the people that are trying to provide these resources, they have to start molding earlier and earlier. Like personally, I've been starting to target more freshmen for that reason, so that I can have that foundation to build upon, and they're ready from the get-go, like a sophomore year, like to start applying to these. Because like you said, there's people that get their junior year internship. Some person in my investment banking class for this year got Citi before he even had the sophomore year internship. So I definitely agree with that. And it's also hard if you don't have that sophomore year internship to say, hey, I've had this experience. I understand, corporate America and, how to kind of route through it if you haven't even done it and you're recruiting for a year ahead. So I definitely mirror that opinion. I'd love to see something about that done. I think like the bigger banks have started to kind of put it. I know like Goldman and JP had opened up in June this year rather than a little earlier. So they're kind of trying to move it farther, but institutionally, like you said, I don't see it changing anytime soon. Hopefully it can slow down at least, though, because we're going to have to start recruiting high schoolers at some point if nothing changes. So I wanted to talk about a little bit outside of finance, and because one of the things I bet that stood out for you when you applied, or for the people looking at your kind of application, is that you're an all-around, well-rounded person. Not only are you involved at school with the investment fund and the finance aspect, but you're also an academic advisor at BYU. You have plenty of volunteer experience. So I'd love to hear about, what are your thoughts on being that well-rounded person and trying to get those experiences on your resume to also, like take away from it and be able to like factor it into like interviews and whatnot.
Yeah. So I think this kind of plays back into what we were talking about a little bit earlier, just being personable, being that person that you want to spend 8, 9, 10 hours a day with at the work desk. And I think just you have to find like something what interests you. Obviously you should have a passion, you should enjoy the academic side, but there have to be other things that bring you joy. And some of those for me include my job as an academic advisor. I love that job. I get to meet plenty of people. I get to help people. And same with the community service work that I do. BYU actually has a really great program. I'm sure FSU has something similar where it's just a university-wide service kind of center, and places from anything, any company, any group, any organization in the community within basically all of Utah that needs help will go to the BYU central location, and they provide so many resources. There are tens and 20s of service opportunities daily that are available for students. Obviously, it's kind of slow right now with COVID, but that's just a great option. And I think that is something that helps you develop those soft skills, those interpersonal skills that are so important in the workplace. And it also gives you a connection with the community. If you go to a new city, you start your new job, maybe if you have some spare time, you just do some community service. That really makes a connection, I think, between you and the community, and it helps you love the people around you more. You kind of create those bonds, and definitely helps adjusting the culture, because wherever you go, there'll be a little bit of culture shock. So for me, that's like one of the main motivations that I have in being involved in the community. And I think it definitely shows in interviews, like those service skills, the charisma that comes from doing those kind of things.
Yeah, I completely agree. But I think that it won't it won't be for everyone, because I guess not everyone is as motivated to help people.
No.
Just at a core level. At a core level, I think it's so great that you do academic advising on top of, you know, everything else that you do. It's just a plain civil service you can be doing to help other people out, and you know, you don't get much out of it besides the joy of just being able to help people. So again, like, I think that's a great way to develop soft skills, and it's so important to be a well-rounded person, to show that you're not just, you know, like somebody that's cracking open the books every day. Like, you want to be, you know, a person outside of it. I think you can provide a lot of insight into this. Is, you know, what can a student do to, like, begin getting into the financial industry and pursuing a career in finance, and they're starting from ground zero? You know, they're lacking a network, they're lacking kind of the resources, and like, what would that guidance be for them?
Yeah, I love this question because I feel like I kind of came from a similar place. My dad is a surgeon. My mom's a kindergarten teacher. I have an older sister who's in med school. My older brother is like on his way to dental school. And so for me, I had kind of hardly any business exposure starting out. And so I kind of had these same experiences where it was sometimes frustrating because I knew people, and, you know, their dad was a big shot in the finance world, and he had a friend who owned a firm, and they got this great internship, and it just was frustrating because it's like it seems like it's too easy for you. Like, you know, how come I can't have these connections? So my biggest advice is just to start with what you know. If you do know people, that's awesome, but if you're lacking that existing network, start with what you know. Start with if your school is a business school, talk to the advisors, go to club meetings. And I think what you'll find is that most people are super willing to help, and they just kind of they want to talk about themselves, you know, ask them questions. And I think those are some of the best resources to start out with, and it kind of builds your knowledge base. The experiences of the people around you, even classmates, even those people who already have the existing connections. And so it can be super overwhelming, and I'm sure you can relate to that. But and I think like the next step beyond that is just growing your network, reaching out to school alumni. And I think those, especially school alumni, are willing to help. You know, they want to see students from their university succeed. And it's frustrating sometimes, but one day at a time, that's all it takes.
Yeah, of course. And I think you brought up a great point about just, you know, starting from somewhere, building a network, because for a lot of those people, like you said, where you come out with like basically no support system, no foundation, you're kind of like left alone. And that's something I relate to as well. You know, my dad works at a nonprofit, and my mother works for the government. So, you know, again, not a lot of overlap there. So I wanted to hear about that mentorship thing, because I think that's a really important part of it. And I bet you can think of like one or two people that have kind of helped you guide that way through all of this. So for those people that are curious about like, how do you initiate that kind of relationship and, you know, continue to build upon it, so that you have somebody to kind of lean on once you're backed against the wall?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I started attending clubs my freshman year, just going to a bunch of different finance clubs. BYU has a great support system for the finance, for all the Marriott School majors, but especially for the finance. I think we have like 10 finance clubs, and they all focus on different tracks of finance. Like, and so I just kind of started exploring those clubs and talking to people. People are super friendly. If you show up to their club meeting and, you know, there's only 5 people there, of course, you know, they're happy to see you and they want to talk to you. But for me, that's kind of where it started. And I attended the Investment Management Association club, and I started chatting, and they're like, hey, like, what interested? And I was completely vulnerable. I was like, you know, I don't really know, you know, I'm trying to figure it out. And so that's kind of like what they're there for. You know, people want to help the upperclassmen. They want to give back because there are people that help them too. And so for me, it was just talking to those club presidents, and they really helped me form, you know, they gave great advice. Talk to this student, you know, they did this internship, and I think that could be something that's appealing to you. But for me, I guess not one person in particular that really stood out for me, but just building the network, starting small, that has definitely helped me.
That's great. Katelyn, I really want to thank you for coming on. Are there any kind of last thoughts you have for anybody watching, or that you might think of?
One thing that kind of like my little motto that I tell myself is just, there are a few of them, but they all kind of tie together. Like, everything happens for a reason, and it'll work out the way it's supposed to work out. You know, for me this summer, I had an internship with MGM Resorts International, and it was canceled,
right.
which was super frustrating because it was like the end of March, and I was like, oh, what am I going to do? But I, you know, told myself everything happens for a reason. You know, maybe I accepted this internship so that it would get canceled and I would be put in this position to learn something or to take on these other internships that I needed to have these experiences. So that's just something I try and keep in mind, and helps me not get too overwhelmed or too stressed, just like trusting that it'll all work out the way it's supposed to work out.
I think those are great final words. Katelyn, thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.